Everyone knows this story. A lone genius, working late into the night, surrounded by wires, glass, and sparks of inspiration. After countless failures, he finally succeeds. Light fills the room. Darkness is defeated. The modern world begins. That man, we are told, was Thomas Alva Edison. And that invention was the light bulb. It is one of the most powerful myths in modern history. It is taught in schools. It is repeated in documentaries. It is printed in textbooks and children's books alike. But like many myths, it hides a far more complicated, and far more uncomfortable, truth. Because Thomas Edison did not invent the light bulb. At least, not in the way history remembers it. And the real story of electric light is not a tale of a single genius moment. It is a brutal war of ideas, patents, money, and power. A story where invention mattered less than ownership. Where credit was not given to the first to create, but to the first to control. This is not a story about a hero. This is a story about a system. To understand how Edison became synonymous with the light bulb, we need to step back, far before his name ever appeared on a patent. Long before Menlo Park. Long before Edison's laboratories. Long before America claimed the future of electricity as its own. The race to create artificial light began decades earlier, across Europe, in workshops, basements, and universities. Inventors were obsessed with the same dream, replacing fire with electricity. Candles were dangerous. Gas lamps exploded. Cities burned regularly. The night was dark, deadly, and expensive. Electric light promised safety, productivity, and control over time itself. And many brilliant minds were already close. In 1802, Humphrey Davy demonstrated the first electric arc light. It was bright, unstable, and impractical, but it proved electricity could create light. Over the following decades, inventors across England, France, Germany, and Russia experimented with glowing filaments, vacuum-sealed glass bulbs, and electrical resistance. By the time Edison entered the field, the problem was no longer, can we make electric light? The problem was, can we make it cheap, reliable, and profitable? This distinction changes everything. Because invention is not the same as innovation. And innovation is not the same as ownership. In the 1840s and 1850s, multiple inventors had already built working incandescent lamps. Some used platinum filaments. Others used carbonized materials. Many even patented their designs. But their systems failed economically. Platinum was too expensive. Vacuum pumps were inefficient. Power distribution barely existed. These inventors were engineers, scientists, tinkerers. They were not industrial strategists. Thomas Edison was. By the time Edison seriously turned his attention to electric light in the late 1870s, he was already famous, not for being a pure inventor, but for being something else entirely. A system builder. A businessman. A master of patents. Edison did not walk into the problem asking, how do I invent a light bulb? He asked something far more dangerous. How do I own electric light? And that question would change history. What followed was not a moment of inspiration, but a campaign. A massive, coordinated effort involving teams of assistants, rapid prototyping, aggressive patent filings, and strategic publicity. Edison's lab in Menlo Park was not a lone genius workshop. It was an invention factory. Dozens of workers tested thousands of filament materials, bamboo, cotton, cardboard, plant fibers, logging results relentlessly. When a carbonized bamboo filament finally burned long enough to be commercially viable, Edison did not call it a breakthrough, he called it a product. And more importantly, he called it his. But here is the part history rarely mentions. Even Edison himself admitted that he did not invent the light bulb from nothing. He improved existing designs. He refined materials. He optimized systems. And then he patented aggressively. Very aggressively. In fact, Edison filed patents not just on the bulb itself, but on the entire electrical ecosystem surrounding it: generators, wiring systems, sockets, switches, and power distribution networks. He was not protecting an invention. He was building a legal wall. A wall designed to keep everyone else out. And it worked. Competitors who had invented similar or even earlier technologies found themselves locked out of the market. Lawsuits dragged on for years. Smaller inventors ran out of money long before courts reached decisions. History, as always, favored the winner. But Edison was not just fighting inventors. He was fighting time. Because while America celebrated him as the Wizard of Menlo Park, Europe was advancing rapidly. New lighting systems emerged. New companies formed. New ideas threatened his control. And this would push Edison to do something even more controversial. Something that would permanently blur the line between invention and manipulation. That is where the myth truly begins. And where the patent war over light turns dark. By the early 1880s, electric light was no longer a scientific curiosity. It was becoming an industry. And Thomas Edison understood something crucial before almost anyone else did. The future of electricity would not be decided in laboratories. It would be decided in courtrooms. Edison's real genius was not the filament. It was the patent strategy behind it. Instead of filing a narrow patent for a single bulb design, Edison filed broad, overlapping patents that described entire systems of electric lighting. He claimed not just how light was produced, but how electricity flowed, how it was regulated, and how it was delivered into homes and streets. In legal terms, this was devastating. Anyone attempting to build an electric lighting system risked infringing on one of Edison's claims. Even if their bulb was different. Even if their method was better. Innovation was allowed. Competition was not. Dozens of inventors challenged Edison's patents. Some had prior art. Some had earlier prototypes. Some had patents of their own, filed years before Edison entered the field. But patent law does not reward fairness. It rewards precision, timing, and resources. Edison had all three. Backed by wealthy investors and powerful financial institutions, Edison Electric Light Company could afford endless litigation. Smaller inventors could not. One of the most significant threats to Edison came from a man named Joseph Swan, a British physicist who had developed a working incandescent lamp years earlier. Swan had publicly demonstrated electric lighting in England before Edison's famous demonstrations in America. Swan had patents. Swan had proof. Swan had history on his side. What Swan did not have was Edison's legal firepower. Rather than fight a prolonged international patent war, the two reached a settlement. In Britain, Swan retained certain rights. In America, Edison dominated. The public, of course, never heard Swan's name. And this pattern repeated again and again. Inventors disappeared not because they were wrong, but because they were outspent. Edison's strategy was simple. File first. File broadly. Sue relentlessly. And when lawsuits were not enough, Edison used something equally powerful. Narrative. Edison was a master of self-promotion. Newspapers loved him. Journalists followed him. Every success was magnified. Every failure reframed as progress. When Edison famously tested thousands of filament materials, the story became proof of perseverance and genius. What was rarely mentioned was that dozens of inventors had already narrowed the problem down long before Edison arrived. History remembers the man who tells the story best. And Edison told his story brilliantly. But the most dangerous part of the myth is not that Edison improved the light bulb. It is that the world began to believe invention itself belonged to individuals, rather than to a collective process of experimentation and shared knowledge. This belief had consequences. Because Edison's approach didn't just shape how light was commercialized. It shaped how innovation itself would function in the industrial age. Patents became weapons. Large companies began to stockpile them. Not to build new technologies, but to prevent others from doing so. Electric light was no longer about illumination. It was about control. And nowhere was this clearer than in the way Edison structured power distribution. Edison insisted on direct current, or DC. His systems worked well over short distances, but required massive infrastructure and constant generation stations. Alternative systems existed. More efficient ones. But adopting them would weaken Edison's patent grip. So he resisted. Aggressively. Edison didn't just argue technically. He fought publicly. He attacked competitors' credibility. He framed alternative systems as dangerous, unstable, even deadly. Innovation slowed. Cities were locked into inferior systems. And once again, the patent holder won, not because the technology was best, but because the legal position was strongest. The irony is hard to ignore. The man celebrated as the inventor who brought light to the world also played a major role in delaying better solutions. But the myth endured. Because myths are useful. They simplify complex histories. They create heroes. They justify power. And by the time the electric age fully arrived, Edison's name was inseparable from light itself. But there was one problem. The world was changing. And a new generation of thinkers was emerging, thinkers who cared less about owning ideas, and more about letting them flow freely. One of them would challenge not just Edison's technology, but the very foundation of his empire. And when that happened, the light bulb myth would begin to crack. Every myth has a cost. In the case of the light bulb, the cost was not just historical accuracy. It was the erasure of an entire generation of inventors whose work made modern electricity possible, but whose names were buried beneath a single narrative. As Edison's empire expanded, the story of electric light became simpler. Too simple. One man. One invention. One moment of genius. But real innovation never works that way. Behind every breakthrough are years of failed experiments, shared ideas, stolen insights, and parallel discoveries happening across continents at the same time. And the light bulb was no exception. Inventors like Humphrey Davy, Warren de la Rue, Joseph Swan, Heinrich Goebel, and dozens of others laid the groundwork long before Edison's patents were filed. Some built working lamps. Some solved filament problems. Some perfected vacuum sealing. Others improved power generation. Their contributions were real. But they did not control the narrative. They did not have large legal teams. They did not own newspapers. They did not dominate patent offices. And so, history slowly erased them. This pattern would repeat throughout the 20th century. The light bulb was not an anomaly, it was a template. Corporations learned that innovation could be monopolized not by being first, but by being legally unavoidable. Broad patents became barriers. Entire fields slowed as smaller inventors were forced to license ideas or abandon them entirely. The story of Edison and the light bulb taught the world a dangerous lesson. That ownership matters more than originality. And that lesson still shapes technology today. But perhaps the most ironic part of the myth is this. Edison himself never claimed to be a lone genius. In his own writings, he frequently described invention as a process of refinement, teamwork, and relentless iteration. His laboratories were collaborative spaces. His assistants were essential. His success depended on systems, not sparks of inspiration. Yet the public wanted a hero. And the myth delivered one. Over time, the story hardened. Textbooks shortened it. Documentaries simplified it. Classrooms repeated it. Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. A sentence that feels true, even though it is deeply misleading. Because Edison did not invent light. He industrialized it. He did not discover electricity. He monetized it. And he did not win the future because his ideas were the best. He won because his patents were stronger. This does not make Edison a villain. But it does make the myth dangerous. Because when we misunderstand how progress happens, we reward the wrong behaviors. We celebrate domination instead of collaboration. Control instead of contribution. And we forget the people who mattered most. The ones who built ideas without protection. The ones who shared knowledge freely. The ones who advanced humanity without ever owning the outcome. Their names fade. The myth survives. Today, the light bulb has become a symbol of creativity itself. It appears in logos, cartoons, presentations, and metaphors around the world. It represents inspiration. But its true history tells a different story. A story of legal battles. Of erased inventors. Of innovation shaped by power rather than truth. Understanding that story does not diminish progress. It clarifies it. Because the real lesson of the light bulb is not about a man in a lab. It is about how societies choose who gets remembered, and who gets forgotten. And in the war of patents, memory itself is the final battleground. This was not the invention of light. It was the invention of a myth. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. By the time electric light began to spread through cities, Edison's control over the industry appeared absolute. His patents covered the bulb. They covered the generators. They covered the wiring. They covered the entire system that delivered light from a power station into a building. But beneath this apparent success, a serious problem was growing. Edison's system was inefficient. Direct current, or DC, could only travel short distances without losing power. That meant cities needed power stations every few blocks. Copper costs were enormous. Maintenance was constant. Expansion was slow and expensive. From a technical standpoint, better solutions already existed. From a legal standpoint, those solutions were dangerous. Because better solutions threatened Edison's patent dominance. Alternating current, or AC, could travel much farther. It required fewer power stations. It reduced costs dramatically. It made large-scale electrification possible. But AC systems did not fit neatly inside Edison's patent ecosystem. Adopting them would mean losing control. So Edison resisted. Not quietly. Not passively. But aggressively. He used his public reputation to frame DC as safe and AC as reckless. He emphasized accidents. He exaggerated risks. He pushed fear as a technological argument. This was not a scientific debate. It was a business strategy. Edison's companies lobbied city officials. They pressured regulators. They delayed approvals for competing systems. They weaponized uncertainty. And once again, patents were not tools for protection. They were tools for obstruction. Innovation slowed where Edison's influence was strongest. Cities locked themselves into inferior infrastructure because it was legally safer. Engineers who wanted to improve systems were forced to work around patents instead of building freely. This is a rarely discussed consequence of patent dominance. It doesn't just decide who profits. It decides what becomes possible. Edison understood this instinctively. If the future had to move forward, it would move through him. But reality has a way of breaking legal walls. As demand for electricity exploded, the limitations of DC became impossible to ignore. The cost was too high. The reach was too short. The system could not scale. And somewhere outside Edison's control, a new electrical philosophy was taking shape. One that treated electricity not as property, but as flow. The coming conflict would not just challenge Edison's technology. It would expose the weakness of building an empire on patents alone. And it would force the world to confront an uncomfortable question. What happens when the best idea loses? Because it doesn't belong to the right person. When technology begins to lose, fear often takes its place. As alternating current systems proved more efficient and increasingly unavoidable, Edison realized that technical arguments alone would no longer protect his empire. The numbers were against him. The scalability of AC was undeniable. Engineers knew it. Investors knew it. City planners knew it. So Edison changed the battlefield. If he could not win on efficiency, he would win on perception. He began a coordinated campaign to associate alternating current with danger, chaos, and death. Newspapers were fed stories emphasizing electrical accidents linked to AC systems. Demonstrations were staged to dramatize the risks. Language was carefully chosen to frame AC as unstable and uncontrollable. Electricity, once marketed as the light of the future, was recast as a silent killer. And then came the most disturbing chapter of all. Public demonstrations were organized in which animals were electrocuted using alternating current. Dogs. Calves. Horses. Each event was designed not to educate, but to shock. The message was simple and brutal: this is what AC does. These demonstrations were not scientific experiments. They were propaganda. The goal was not understanding. It was association. AC equals death. DC equals safety. This narrative was pushed relentlessly. Edison himself avoided direct public involvement whenever possible, but his laboratories, associates, and companies were deeply entangled in the effort. Engineers who objected were ignored. Critics were marginalized. The spectacle worked. Fear spreads faster than facts. And then, in a moment that permanently stained the history of electricity, the campaign escalated. The electric chair. When the state of New York searched for a new, more humane method of execution, Edison's circle saw an opportunity. If capital punishment could be linked to alternating current, the association would be sealed in the public mind. Death by electricity would mean death by AC. Edison's associates actively advised on the development of the electric chair. They ensured alternating current was used. They emphasized its lethality. They shaped the narrative before the first execution ever occurred. The first use of the electric chair was not humane. It was horrifying. Witnesses described prolonged suffering, burning flesh, and repeated jolts of electricity. The spectacle horrified the public, but not in the way Edison's camp had hoped. Electricity itself began to look monstrous. Yet even in failure, the message lingered. AC was dangerous. AC killed. This was no longer a debate about technology. It was psychological warfare. Meanwhile, the light bulb myth quietly absorbed the conflict. Edison remained the heroic inventor. His opponents were cast as reckless outsiders playing with forces they did not understand. But reality continued to assert itself. Despite fear campaigns, despite legal pressure, despite moral compromises, alternating current spread. Its advantages were too great. The world needed power that could travel far, cheaply, and reliably. Eventually, Edison's companies were absorbed into larger corporate structures. The DC system faded. AC became the global standard. Edison lost the technical war. But he won something else. He kept his legacy intact. The myth did not change. The man who fought progress to protect patents remained remembered as the man who brought light to humanity. And the darker chapters were quietly forgotten. This is the power of narrative. It does not need to be true. It only needs to be repeated. The myth of the lone inventor is comforting. It suggests that progress comes from singular brilliance. That history moves forward because one extraordinary mind sees what no one else can. But Edison's success exposes how misleading that idea really is. Menlo Park was not a temple of individual genius. It was an industrial laboratory. Behind every patent bearing Edison's name stood dozens of engineers, machinists, chemists, mathematicians, and technicians. These men designed components, ran experiments, logged failures, refined materials, and solved problems Edison never personally touched. They were not assistants in the romantic sense. They were the engine. Edison himself openly described his laboratory as an invention factory. Work was divided. Tasks were assigned. Results were documented relentlessly. Credit, however, flowed in only one direction: upward. Employees signed contracts assigning all intellectual property to Edison. Any discovery made inside the lab, regardless of who actually made it, became Edison's invention by law. This was legal. It was also transformative. Because it meant that innovation could now be centralized. Ideas no longer belonged to thinkers. They belonged to organizations. Edison did not invent this system, but he perfected it. Talented engineers came to Menlo Park knowing their names would not appear on patents. They traded recognition for stability, access to equipment, and proximity to power. Some accepted this reality. Others quietly resented it. Figures like Francis Upton, a trained mathematician and physicist, played critical roles in designing generators and refining electrical systems. Charles Batchelor managed experiments and engineering logistics. Lewis Latimer, one of the few black inventors working in the field, improved filament manufacturing and drafted critical patent diagrams. Their contributions were substantial. Their recognition was minimal. When history tells the story of the light bulb, these names rarely appear. They are footnotes, if they are mentioned at all. The myth does not have room for teams. It requires a face. And Edison understood this instinctively. Public identity mattered. Investors trusted individuals more than systems. Newspapers preferred heroes over processes. The public wanted a genius, not a corporation. So Edison became the brand. This branding had long-term consequences. Future companies copied the model. Research labs emerged where innovation was collective, but credit was consolidated. Bell Labs, RCA, Xerox PARC. The structure was efficient. The narrative was dishonest. Progress accelerated, but memory narrowed. And as this model spread, patent ownership drifted further away from individual creators. Legal departments grew. Portfolios expanded. Innovation became something you defended rather than something you shared. The light bulb was no longer just a device. It was proof that the age of solitary inventors was ending. And that the age of institutional control had begun. This shift fundamentally changed how societies understand creativity. The question was no longer, who invented this? It became, who owns this? And once ownership replaced authorship, history followed suit. The names that mattered were the ones on legal documents, not workbenches. This transformation did not make Edison unique. It made him early. And that is why the light bulb myth endures. It disguises a structural change in innovation as a personal triumph. And that disguise was incredibly effective. A myth only survives if it is repeated. And by the early 20th century, the story of the light bulb had found the perfect machine for repetition. Education. As electricity became a symbol of modernity, nations needed heroes to represent progress. Textbooks were simplified. Timelines were compressed. Complex, multi-decade processes were reduced to single names and dates. Thomas Edison fit perfectly. He was American. He was prolific. He was alive long enough to reinforce the story himself. So the narrative crystallized. Edison invented the light bulb. Edison brought light to the world. Edison changed history. This version of events was easy to teach and easy to remember. It required no discussion of patent law, no explanation of prior art, no acknowledgement of erased contributors. Complexity was the enemy. And complexity was removed. School curricula favored clarity over accuracy. Children were taught outcomes, not processes. Invention became a moment, not a struggle. Genius became innate, not collaborative. The light bulb icon entered classrooms as a metaphor for ideas themselves. Cartoons, diagrams, and illustrations reinforced the association between Edison and inspiration. Over time, the symbol replaced the story. Media followed the same path. Early films, radio programs, and later television documentaries repeated the simplified narrative. Edison appeared as a wizard-like figure, relentless, curious, unstoppable. His failures were framed as stepping stones. His conflicts were softened or ignored. Patent wars were not cinematic. Heroes were. And so the myth became entertainment. By the time Edison died in 1931, the story was no longer his to control. It had become cultural infrastructure. Cities dimmed their lights in his honor. Newspapers called him the greatest inventor who ever lived. Few mentioned the lawsuits. Fewer still mentioned the inventors whose work made his possible. The myth was complete. Once embedded in education and media, it became self-reinforcing. Each generation learned the same story and passed it forward. Teachers repeated what they had been taught. Writers referenced previous works. Documentaries cited earlier documentaries. Circular authority replaced evidence. And challenging the myth began to feel uncomfortable. Correcting it required effort. It required nuance. It required admitting that history had been flattened for convenience. So most people did not challenge it. Even today, when historical records are widely available, the simplified version dominates search results, popular videos, and casual explanations. The myth is not maintained by conspiracy. It is maintained by momentum. Because myths that explain the world simply are hard to replace with truths that explain it honestly. And the light bulb myth serves a deeper psychological function. It reassures us that progress is inevitable. That genius will appear when needed. That systems of power reward the right people. Questioning the myth threatens those assumptions. If Edison did not invent the light bulb alone, then how many other stories are wrong? If patents shaped progress more than ideas, then what does that say about innovation today? These are uncomfortable questions. And so the myth survives. Not because it is accurate, but because it is useful. The light bulb myth did not end with Edison. It evolved. What Edison demonstrated was not just how to dominate an industry, but how to shape the rules of innovation itself. And once those rules were established, they spread far beyond electricity. Today, the same dynamics govern technology, medicine, software, and communication. The names have changed. The strategies have not. Modern corporations build vast patent portfolios not to invent more, but to control who is allowed to invent at all. Thousands of patents sit unused, filed defensively, waiting to be activated only when a competitor gets too close. This is not an accident. It is the legacy of Edison's approach. In the technology sector, patent wars define entire eras. Companies sue not to win damages, but to slow rivals. To drain resources. To force licensing agreements. To create legal minefields that only the largest players can navigate. Innovation becomes a legal endurance test. Small teams may have better ideas. Startups may have superior designs. Independent inventors may see the future first. But without legal armor, they rarely survive. This mirrors the electric age almost perfectly. Just as Edison controlled light through system-level patents, modern giants control ecosystems. Operating systems. App stores. Communication protocols. Cloud infrastructure. The product is only one layer. Ownership is the real prize. And like Edison, these companies shape public narratives carefully. Founders are elevated to mythic status. Breakthroughs are personalized. Complex collaborations are hidden behind single faces. The myth of the lone genius is recycled again and again. Because it sells. But this myth obscures a crucial reality. Most modern innovation is incremental. It builds on open research, shared standards, and collective problem solving. Yet credit flows upward, toward those who control distribution and legal access. The light bulb story taught society to accept this imbalance. It taught us that inventing and owning are the same thing. They are not. The consequences extend beyond technology. In medicine, life-saving treatments are delayed or priced out of reach due to patent disputes. In renewable energy, promising solutions are slowed by licensing barriers. In software, entire categories of tools are locked behind proprietary walls. Progress becomes conditional. Not on what is possible, but on what is permitted. This does not mean patents are inherently evil. They can protect inventors. They can encourage investment. They can reward risk. But history shows what happens when patents become weapons instead of shields. They stop serving innovation and start serving power. The light bulb myth makes this easier to ignore. It frames control as genius. It reframes dominance as destiny. It turns structural advantage into personal brilliance. And as long as we believe that story, the system remains unquestioned. But once the myth cracks, patterns emerge. Edison was not an exception. He was the prototype. The light bulb still hangs above our understanding of creativity. It appears in logos, classrooms, presentations, and moments of supposed inspiration. It represents ideas forming instantly, breakthroughs appearing out of nowhere, genius striking like lightning. But its real history tells a quieter, more unsettling story. Progress is not sudden. Innovation is not isolated. An invention is rarely owned by the first mind that imagines it. The truth about the light bulb is not that Thomas Edison was a fraud. It is that he was something far more representative. He was a man who understood the system emerging around him, and learned how to master it before anyone else. Edison did not invent the future alone. He positioned himself at its center. And from there, he shaped how progress would be remembered. The myth of Edison and the light bulb comforts us because it simplifies a world that is deeply complex. It reassures us that history moves forward through exceptional individuals rather than through messy networks of collaboration, conflict, and compromise. But that comfort comes at a price. When we celebrate myths instead of mechanisms, we misunderstand how change really happens. We train ourselves to look for heroes instead of systems. We reward control instead of contribution. And we repeat the same mistakes. The forgotten inventors of the electric age were not less brilliant. They were less protected, less funded, less visible. Their ideas lived on, but their names did not. That erasure matters. Because memory shapes incentives. If society believes innovation belongs to whoever patents it first, then creativity becomes a race to ownership, not understanding. If progress is measured by dominance, collaboration becomes a weakness. The light bulb myth taught generations to accept these assumptions without question. But history does not have to be mythologized to be meaningful. The real story of electric light is more human, more impressive, and more honest than the legend allows. It is a story of shared knowledge crossing borders. Of engineers building on each other's failures. Of ideas evolving through conflict rather than appearing fully formed. And it is a reminder that progress is fragile. It can be accelerated by openness. It can be slowed by fear. It can be shaped, and misshaped, by law. Patents did not bring light to the world. People did. Patents decided who controlled it. Understanding that difference does not diminish Edison's achievements. It places them in context. It turns a symbol back into a process. And once you see that process clearly, the light bulb changes meaning. It no longer represents sudden genius. It represents accumulation, iteration, struggle, and choice. The choice to share or to hoard. The choice to collaborate or to dominate. The choice to tell the full story, or the convenient one. The myth survives because it is easy. The truth matters because it is useful. And in a world still defined by patent wars, that truth may be the most important invention of all.